What's next?
Probably the biggest thing, if I could say, like, take one thing away from this, is the concept of organizational health. It's this pyramid which says that for a business to be properly healthy in the way that it communicates and in how it runs, you need to have these things in place. So it has to be built on a basis of trust. Um, and once you have trust, you can have healthy conflict. Once you are able to have that flow of conflict, you can then get into commitment, accountability, and then you get the results that you need. And I am particularly drawn to the bottom two pillars of that, so the trust and the conflict piece. What we mean by trust in this sense is like a vulnerability based trust. We're all very open and honest, and we kind of lead by showing. And so that's something that myself and my co-founders and we try to encourage the rest of the leadership team to lean into that kind of vulnerability based trust where you have to earn it and you have to kind of show it and live it. And then the conflict piece is basically about, look, even with your best friends, even with your closest colleagues, conflict will arise. It doesn't have to be this big, scary, dirty word. It's just normal. But what we have to do is we have to be able to navigate it in a healthy way. And there's this kind of concept of a spectrum of conflict, where on one side you've got artificial harmony, which is where, somebody might say something in a meeting, I think we should do this, and everyone nods and is like, and then kind of comes away afterwards or like messages and is like, I definitely we shouldn't do that. But people have just kind of been maybe quite British or Canadian about it and just said, sounds good. Um, and that's obviously really unhealthy. On the other end of the spectrum, you're very vocal about disagreements, but in a way which doesn't have very much care or empathy. So it comes across as maybe like a mean-spirited attack. You're an idiot for thinking that. Why would you do that? Obviously, neither of those are places that you want to be. And so we aim to be in the middle of that spectrum, which is basically about passionate, unfiltered debate and just being clear and open and honest about your thoughts so you can work through something and healthfully come to a conclusion.
I want to really put you on the spot on this one.
Okay.
On a good day, we can all do that pretty well. But what
Mm.
about when we're under stress? What about when the heat is on? What about when in that environment, how do we do that? How do you find that these days
Mm.
in your company of friends?
First of all, I love sharing my opinion. So I actually quite like it. So I think it comes relatively naturally to me. But two things I would say. One is that I've noticed that personally I have a tendency to, it's maybe it's erring towards the artificial harmony, but it's more of I noticed that a habit that I might have is I slightly defer to other people because partly because I'm the youngest by quite a way of my leadership team. Part of me thinks, well, these people obviously know better than I do. So sometimes when there's something that's discussed where I might have a different view, unless I feel really strongly about it, I find myself thinking, well, they know best, so I'll just leave them to it. And actually, something I've been really working on this year, at the beginning of the year, we did an exercise where we set out what our kind of like word of the year is, and mine is honesty. Not that I'm ever purposefully dishonest, but I mean, I'm trying to be honest with myself, first of all, to notice things like that, and then to be honest with my opinions and to flag and say, actually, I think here is my view, even if where what I might have done before is think I won't bother bringing that up because they know what they're doing.
Do you feel like you've, as a leadership team, been through that some of those U's of kind of rupture and repair of like, oh, that got pretty crunchy, but we've come out the other side and put it to bed?
Because we've built this in from day one and we're certainly not perfect at it, and there's times that we find ourselves drifting and then we say, oh, we need to make sure we're really living this. But because I think we do a pretty good job of the trust piece, honestly, it's never really that uncomfortable. Like we'll have the debates, but it's just a conversation. Like it doesn't feel like this big frustrating, challenging piece.
For anyone who's thinking, whoa, okay, that level of trust sounds attractive, what kind of disciplines or rhythms or routines have you adopted that have helped establish such a high functioning level of trust?
In our so every Monday morning, the leadership team comes together for what we call a weekly tactical. And at the beginning of that, we protect time to do a round the room check-in. How are we? How was our weekend? We also give ourselves a rating out of 5, how we're feeling this Monday morning. And we sometimes it's like, I went to the park this weekend, and it's kind of, light things, but also we're honest when there is something that isn't just lovely and bright. So, you know, I'm I'm a bit struggling with my mental health at the moment, or someone in my family is sick, or I'm having this challenge or whatever. And so we'll say, actually, this week I'm a bit more of a 3 than, normally our scores are quite high, but it's like sometimes obviously you're not. Like we all, of course, are people. One of our values is human first, and it's really important to acknowledge we are all humans before we are whatever our job is. And so I think being open about those things with ourselves as a leadership team and to an extent the wider team as well helps to just you create more real relationships with each other beyond just colleague, and also just empathy and acknowledgement that we're kind of honest and open with each other.
What you're saying resonates from my experience of you as a company. And I also know that you do at least one or not two annual retreats a year.
We do a January summit with the whole team to kind of kick off the year. And then in the summer, we have our annual retreat. We go to Norfolk and we have a lovely 2.5, almost 3 days of workshops and connective time and fun and on all of those things. And we also in the quarters in between that, we have whole team training days where we come together. So we have those kind of milestones each quarter of the year. And then we also, on a weekly basis, on a Monday, we have our town hall. We start out the town hall with looking at our vision, mission, values, strategic anchors, and we talk about ways in which the team lived those values, etc., in the last week, what's coming up ahead this week, what to expect, celebrating each other, that kind of thing. And then Friday, end of the week, we do a half-hour checkout. We just had ours, where everyone goes around and shares a highlight and a learning of the week, which oftentimes is also a moment of vulnerability of, actually, I made this mistake or this week, and here's what I learned from it, that kind of thing.